Recently, for the sake of comparison, I decided to refresh my memory on the first season of Game of Thrones. It had been a while, so why not watch some of the highlights, like the premiere, the finale, Baelor, and see how it stacks up to the first season of House of the Dragon. Then something funny happened. I couldn't find any episodes that I wanted to skip and ended up accidentally binging the entire season in 2 days. It's just that good, quickly introducing and then masterfully building on some of the best characters in modern media. How could you not root for the ever-noble Starks, rue the existence of Joffrey Baratheon, laugh with Tyrion Lannister, or grow invested in the plight of Daenerys Targaryen? It may not have the production value of later seasons, but it's easily one of the most confident and competent debuts in TV history. Interestingly enough, for as much as its spin-off House of the Dragon attempted to recreate the tone of Game of Thrones, to the point where other spin-offs were reportedly cancelled for not being Game of Thronesy enough, it's a significant departure in terms of story structure and characterization. Once we get that familiar opening theme, the differences grow starker, pun intended, from there, with characters that have much grayer morality. You can't argue that House of the Dragon's hefty budget shows. Where Game of Thrones Season 1 had very little fantasy, both by the nature of its plot and likely by budget restraints that grew much looser later in its run, House of the Dragon gives us incredible action scenes with full-grown dragons. But in terms of its storytelling, its different approach has mixed results. Perhaps the most instantly noticeable difference between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones is the fact that we're able to stay focused on the Targaryens and those around them for the entirety of House of the Dragon Season 1. That's something that will likely change moving forward now that the battle lines in the Dance of the Dragons have been drawn. Meanwhile, Game of Thrones constantly jumped around from Winterfell to King's Landing to the lands across the Narrow Sea, and, well, you get it. There was a lot of hopping around. Looking back at it now, it's incredibly admirable how much world building Game of Thrones was able to do in that first season. It had to make us immediately invested in the Starks, Lannisters, Targaryens, the Dothraki, and a whole bunch of groups in between while sneakily weaving in hundreds of years of history. Do we really care about Jon Arryn, some guy that everyone tells us was a solid dude but was apparently unjustly murdered?
Everybody knows that.
Yes, of course.
Not really, but we are made to care about how its ripple effects impact the lives of people like Ned Stark. Plus, Jaime Lannister shoving a sweet kid out a window to hide the fact that he's screwing his sister is a pretty solid way to build intrigue in the pilot.
The things I do for love.
That said, there are a few times when the Game of Thrones structure does prove frustrating. When we're on the edge of our seats waiting to see what will happen as tension grows around Ned and King's Landing,
I did warn you not to trust me.
it'll tear us away to check up on Daenerys or to show Jon Snow adjusting to life in the Night's Watch. It's a problem that House of the Dragon doesn't have to worry about, and that's often a relief. It gives us time to grow to love the sweet bond between Rhaenyra and Alicent before slowly eroding it, and their heartbreaking falling out is the best part of Season 1. It also gives us a chance to see the layers beneath the well-intentioned but weak and passive Viserys, the sad and often cruel relationship between father and daughter Alicent and Otto, and the sexual tension between uncle and niece Rhaenyra and Daemon. And by the way, I'm not happy about the words sexual tension between uncle and niece either, but such is House of the Dragon. Where the House of the Dragon approach frequently faced issues, though, is in the massive time jumps. They often had the same drawback as Game of Thrones' branching narrative, but instead of tearing us from a character we wanted to see more of, it'd rob us of the immediate aftermath we might have otherwise seen. Plus, while Emma Darcy has done an incredible job as the adult Rhaenyra, I did find myself missing the impeccable work of Millie Alcock. Seeing that aftermath likely would have better contextualized some of the characters' decisions, like in the case of the previously cool-headed Rhaenys bursting through the dragon pit. But it also didn't allow us to get attached to characters outside of Rhaenyra, Alicent, Daemon, and Viserys. This is most jarring, comparison-wise, in the finale, where the big death is that of Lucerys' Luke Valerian. It's made clear quickly that he's a nice kid, but aside from some sympathetic scenes in that final episode, we're not given a chance to get to know him all that well. That doesn't mean it's not heartbreaking when Vhagar decides to take a big old bite out of him and his much smaller dragon Arax, but that doesn't hold a candle to when Game of Thrones offed its own main character. To this day, it hurts to watch Ned Stark lose his head in Baelor. We had plenty of time to grow to love him and his noble ways, something we can't say for Luke. I'm furious at Aemond, but not nearly as furious as I was at Joffrey.
Very amusing.
But even if they falter in their execution here and there, both approaches are smart ways to cover a lot of ground quickly and have us get to know the many players at its center.
The crown cannot stand strong if the House of the Dragon remains divided.
The other most prominent difference between the two shows is how quickly Game of Thrones establishes good guys and bad guys. Right from the jump, we get to know Ned as an honorable man and loving father, and Daenerys is immediately sympathetic, always at the mercy of the whims of her horrible, abusive brother. Meanwhile, it only takes Joffrey 2 episodes to get an innocent butcher's boy killed, and we already mentioned that we're introduced to Jaime and Cersei by the whole shoving a kid out the window thing. That's not to say there aren't more ambiguous characters on the sidelines. It's hard to know what to immediately make of the sly Varys and Littlefinger, or the brash but humorous Robert Baratheon, but we know pretty quickly which sides we should be taking.
No! No!
The characters in House of the Dragon, meanwhile, vary infinitely more in their morals, and that's by design. Co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik previously told IGN that
hopefully they'll start with one and then they'll switch to the other and then they'll go back and forth and there'll be the greens and the blacks and they won't be able to decide which is which and people will have fights in bars over it.
Rhaenyra, who could be called the main character of this series, is far from an upstanding citizen, but it's also easy to feel for her plight as she struggles against Westeros' patriarchy and the obligations of the crown. It gets even messier from there. Viserys means well and wants to maintain peace among the realm and with his daughter, but his greed for a son leads to his first wife's torturous death. Alicent betrays her best friend and has raised some absolutely insufferable sons with Viserys, but you can see the love she still holds for Rhaenyra and the ways in which she struggles with being a pawn for the men in her life. And then you have Daemon, a character who's, well, objectively horrible, but hey, he still loves his brother, and it's hard not to love Matt Smith's incredible acting. That's something that's consistent across the board. Paddy Considine in particular did a fantastic job showing the many complexities beneath Viserys. And hey, humans are messy. House of the Dragon understands that and portrays it well, even if it's sometimes stunted by those aforementioned time jumps. It's no doubt an intriguing approach, and in fact, it's where most of House of the Dragon's intrigue came from. Where Game of Thrones Season 1 largely focused on 2 central mysteries, who killed Jon Arryn and will Bran remember who tried to kill him, House of the Dragon leaves us wondering just how many war crimes Daemon will commit in a given episode. That's kind of a joke, but really, we're waiting to see whose side we'll be on, something that can easily shift from episode to episode. Still, there are times when I missed having someone to more clearly root for in House of the Dragon. Sure, there are more noble characters like Harwin Strong, but they tend to be killed off pretty quickly. I find myself on Team Black not because I like Rhaenyra and Daemon so much, but because I can't bring myself to root for Criston Cole or Alicent's awful sons. And despicable as they may be, even they aren't as hateable as Joffrey Baratheon quite yet. Plus, there are times where House of the Dragon feels oppressively dark. Basically, it could have used a Tyrion, someone to lighten the mood now and again. I still laugh at his confession in the Vale.
When I was 7, I saw a servant girl bathing in the river. I stole her robe, and she was forced to return to the castle, naked and in tears. If I close my eyes, I can still see her tits bouncing.
It may be unfair to compare the characters of House of the Dragon to the now iconic ones of Game of Thrones, but it's a comparison that's inevitable. House of the Dragon, whether it likes it or not, will always be put up against the mothership. On that note, it doesn't seem like House of the Dragon is even shying away from that comparison. Much has been made about its decision to stick with the same exact theme song from Game of Thrones, but even before that, it doesn't hide its source. It opens, after all, with a text card telling us where we are in Westeros history at the moment, with the words fading away until all that reads is 172 years before Daenerys Targaryen. I mean, points for self-awareness. They know who we're here for. And while it's a balm to not have to get to know these different houses so quickly, when House of the Dragon brings up the Starks, Lannisters, and Baratheons, it can rest assured that audiences know exactly what that means.
Cregan Stark is close to your age than to mine. I would hope that as men, we can find some common interest.
It also faces the classic prequel problem. We know, much later down the line, that the Targaryens are going to lose. After all, we already watched their descendants fall. But what House of the Dragon is determined to do is make us care about those characters in the meantime, and that's all any prequel can hope for. It may not have all the unpredictability of Game of Thrones, but it does have some damn complex characters. So what's better, Game of Thrones Season 1 or House of the Dragon so far? Well, it kinda depends. Do you prefer moral ambiguity or a clearer fight between mostly good and evil? I may prefer the charms and drama of Game of Thrones, but it's also a relief to stick with one group throughout House of the Dragon. And either way, you're gonna get some messiness in the narrative structure. When all is said and done, the comparison between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones may not be as straightforward as it initially seems. Credit to House of the Dragon for carving something of its own path. The world may be the same, but the stories told within it are shockingly different. For more on House of the Dragon, check out why it changed the book canon in a major way and watch a sword expert react to the fights. And for everything else, stick with IGN.